on Behind the Headlines with me, Timothy Nyangweso. Every Wednesday, live in our studios in the heart of Kampala, we have conversations that have analysis, explanation, but not every truth is fact, and not every fact is truth. Every Wednesday, 10 p.m. on your public broadcaster.
All on your public broadcaster, UBC, Inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. With a population of about 90% being either Christian or Muslim, looking at 41.1 both Protestant or born again, 39.3 being Catholics and 13.7 being Muslim, 1.9 the others there. With the campus of the Quran and the Bible, why are religious leaders and religious institutions shunning the pains of ordinary Ugandans? We come to things like corruption, nepotism, education, pains of health. Why are they not answering these pains? With the recent inauguration being of Bishop Moses Odong, is this the silver lining that brings hope to every Ugandan? We take a deep dive in this story to find out if this is a silver lining or the dark cloud still goes on. Let's meet our panel.
Conversation with distinguished thought leaders spanning diverse religious affiliations. Introducing your panel. Apostle Grace Lubega, a distinguished senior pastor and founder of Phaneroo Ministries, Meg Manifest. Apostle Grace Lubega, an alumnus of Uganda Christian University. Reverend Canon Diana Balo Mirembe Kensiga, a beacon of positivity with an infectious smile. She's not only an esteemed teacher, but also an Anglican reverend in the Church of Uganda. From 1992 to 2005, she served as a missionary in South Africa, offering counseling to educators, troubled marriages, AIDS-affected individuals, and families at large. She also served as a vicar at the All Saints Cathedral, Kampala. Reverend Canon Geoffrey Byarugaba, the devoted vicar at the Church of Resurrection in Bugolobi, Kampala. He is a fervent advocate for change and has been elected as the chair of the Provincial House of Clergy. His unwavering commitment to his faith is evident through his service as acting chaplain of St. Francis Chapel and his role as national team leader of AEE, African Evangelistic Enterprise. Sheikh Juma Baket Chuchu, a respected Muslim cleric and National Secretary for Education and Sports at the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council headquarters in Old Kampala. With a decade of experience as a class teacher in various secondary schools, he's a beacon of knowledge. He's also one of the esteemed sheikhs chosen to deliver Friday sermons Al-Khatwib at the Gaddafi National Mosque. Professor Sarah Sally, your very own luminary, stands at the forefront of innovation and diversity in all matters. Professor Sarah Sally is the Dean at the School of Women and Gender Studies in Makerere. She brings a wealth of knowledge and perspective to the body of knowledge on your show. Join the conversation that inspires and uplifts Uganda only on your public broadcaster, UBC, Inspiring Uganda. Let's make the difference.
So you have met the panel, and the discussion is basically what are religious leaders and religious institutions doing about the crisis in this country. We talk about all the spheres and we wonder why they're not dealing with them or playing ostrich. You can be part of the show, text us or send us a message on 079 60 92 25. Let us know what you think, or go to Twitter, hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines, and you'll be part of this conversation. We'll be getting in some of your messages later. But before I get to the panel, one of the things I think I should say to a country as ours, congratulations, first of all, that 2027 we'll be seeing AFCON here. So that is very big news for all of us, and it is something that has come through. Except Professor Sarah, gentlemen and lady, you're very welcome. Thank you for gracing us with your presence here today.
Thank you.
And we hope we have a fruitful and engaging discussion that benefits the people that are watching us.
Thank you.
So let me start with Professor. Professor, there's a lot said about religious institutions, religious leaders. We have many of them here from different sects. But what's the role of religious institutions in nation building?
Wow. Thank you very much, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. Yeah, the role of the church or the role of religious institutions. First of all, we have to know that most of the religious institutions predate the nation state as we know it today. So there were the forms of organization, there were the forms that provided social welfare to people. So most of the current state as we know it today came after religious institutions have been there, because religious institutions came in earlier as a way of organizing life, and from there, of course, as the society became more sophisticated, we see the state as it is today. So one, the religious institutions have anchored what the state is today in terms of providing things like legislation, in terms of providing things like, guiding legislation by providing the moral values and the systems that the state aspires to. Because we know things like the law do not come from the abstract. They come from the social context in which they arise. So value systems and whatever a particular state stands for will always reflect what that society looks like. And a lot of what that society looks like is communicated through their religious practices. So if you go, for example, to Saudi Arabia, you will know that a lot of the laws that come from there will in a way mirror. If you go to the Western world, the kind of laws you see there also mirror their kind of society. And a lot of this is anchored within the religious institutions. So religious institutions anchor society and therefore anchor the state that comes out of that society. But also they provide the moral compass to which can contribute to guiding the state on a moral path beyond what we consider the secular. But of course, when people ask the role of the state, of religion in nation building, most of the time it is raised as if, what should the church contribute today? What should the mosque contribute today? What I'm saying is that they are already contributing. But a lot of the time when that question arises, it's because the state thinks religious institutions are not doing enough. So we don't know whether they are not doing enough, but they are here, they'll speak for themselves. We who observe think they are doing enough. They provide welfare, they provide comfort and support. You know, in our country, we don't have a social welfare system. So that social welfare system most times is provided by religious institutions. If you've lost a person, they're the ones that check on you. If there's a kind of social adversity, that's where we all tend to run. So they help us to become resilient. They help us to cope with bad times, and you cannot underestimate that kind of value. But also they give you with a moral direction. They give people a network. They give people a social system, social capital with which to organize. But I know the state oftentimes has wanted them to do more, and this sometimes comes up when the state feels the religious institution is undermining state systems, but sometimes maybe religious leaders are simply demanding accountability. And religious leaders are very respectable people. They have a platform many of us do not have. And that when they preach, those who believe in them follow. So sometimes when in the process of giving us moral guidance, they will talk about vices which are happening in society. And sometimes these vices are propagated within state institutions such as the executive, or if they're talking about corruption in the local government. So it ends up appearing like they are critiquing the state, and sometimes people say they should be doing more in terms of nation building. Sometimes that question comes up when religious leaders are being called upon to build more unity, okay, other than being more divisive. And I know of recent religious institutions in Uganda, I think, have tried to be more cohesive. But I know there are places where there are divisions in tribe, there are divisions in religion, and sometimes religious institutions are blamed for this. So I think they are doing more, but maybe they can do more.
Okay, thank you very much. Apostle Grace, she spoke about the moral compass, something I've heard you speak about on several occasions, but also yesterday you were part of the consecration. Is that a reflection of what the population is feeling right now? Are religious institutions doing enough?
Yes, and I'll ultimately have to go back to that question. I think everybody recognizes that human beings are human beings. We're all imperfect beings in creation. So ultimately the question, even to those who don't believe in God, is do we have evil in the world. Does evil exist in the world? Yes. The perversions we see in society, the drug addictions that we see, terror, and many other things, all of these are a reflection of evil. But for you to be able to say that you're going to judge what is evil, it means that innately you have a definition of what is good. Because you cannot judge evil when you don't know what is good. But again, we believe that it's not in man to actually judge what is evil, what is good, except there is a moral law, what she was saying. And that's important. Because if there is a moral law, then there should be a moral law giver. Because again, we are talking about society here, but we're also cognizant of the fact that there are many people out there who don't even believe in God. So then if we don't believe in God, firstly, how then do we even judge what is evil and what is good? If I don't have a moral law or a moral lawgiver, then there is no reason for me to judge what is evil and what is good. That's why religion, faiths come in. Faiths come in firstly to help us understand, one, that there is evil and good. Why? Because we have a moral compass, and man cannot have their own moral compass unless there is a moral lawgiver. We must also admit that we're in a society where people are dealing away with God, trying to disprove him through many other means, which is absurd. And consequently, it's the reason why we see many crises in the world, because people are dealing away with God. If you see many of the nations across that are taking the faith out of the equation, either from the education systems, our business systems, legislative systems. The moment you deal away with God, you're actually going to birth more crisis. So we also want to recognize that sometimes when government or states are working with these religious institutions, they must recognize their importance and their place. She said something very important here, that there's a young man right now in my head I know, who, if he had not known this way of the truth, he should be probably a thug somewhere on Ginger Road trying to kill somebody. For me, as a pastor or any of these ministers that you see here, to be able to appeal to that conscience and give it some sort of direction in life to know that this is the way to go, that ultimately, for me, in my heart, I believe we're getting somewhere. But you also asked this issue of the consecration. I think for me, it's spelling some sort of order, It's not really the artifacts, the things we see that are done within the process, but the place of order and the unity that is so much desired in the diversions that we're starting to see in society while the crisis still exists. So I think for me, that place where people are able to come together and say, we have a certain order, we are choosing certain leaders to direct us, to comfort us, to hold us accountable, in the course of executing our duties. I believe that we are on the right path. So as Professor Sarah has said rightly, that any nation that deals away or esteems lightly, like we have seen most secular societies, unfortunately in Western countries, whenever you deal away with the faith, you're actually bound to have more crisis. The question is, how do we come through these things? Lastly, I think before you take it to the next speaker, I'll give you examples of churches or ministries I know, ourselves inclusive, where, for example, every week we are in prisons, trying to do our own part in rehabilitating these people we've lost on a weekly basis. These churches feed orphans and widows. Even in COVID, we did the same. Up to Gulu, where we picked young children and worked with the Irene Gleason Foundation to make sure that these children get some food. You could ask, I think, make some research on the budget of government on nodding disease and find out how many people have actually been actively supporting nodding disease patients in the North. You'll find that churches have actually, including ourselves, have actually been very active entities in trying to build this nation. We are doing our part.
And speaking with you, Apostle Grace, you said the moral giver and the compass. Who is the moral giver? Who gives the morals here? Because the Bible seems to be the compass and the Quran. But who gives this moral? Who gives it the gist that it needs to have?
God. That's why we're saying that that we have to have a conversation of God in society. Yet we are living in a society that is trying to do away with God, as if God does not exist. We're living in societies, and some of us who have been studying West Africa, Western nations, we see that they're trying to disprove the existence of God. And I'm saying that's the danger. If you say God does not exist, so you're saying there is no moral giver. If there is no moral giver, there is no moral law. If there is no moral law, then you cannot judge what is evil and what is not. That is why you see now in West Africa, in these nations, they are now defining marriage differently. Because I mean, I can choose my own way. If I think that a man is a woman or a woman is a man, I mean, you can't define that for me. You see?
Thank you very much, Apostle. I'll be coming back to you, something that you have tickled. Let me come to Reverend Geoffrey. When we look at the moral compass, the moral law, and we reflect on our country, the Resurrection Church is one of the longest serving, especially in areas that I have seen it in. What is the identity of our country, and who gives it identity?
Thank you, Timothy. The challenge, if you see the evolution of nations, right from the book of Genesis in chapter 11, God's plan is that people exist in nations. Nations with common identity in terms of language, history, and aspirations. If you have a nation without a dominant definition of such a nation in terms of faith, in terms of aspirations, where you have a common direction that nation is going, you'll have a multiplicity, a cocktail of ideas. Like Uganda, one of the challenges we have is, I don't think we are a nation yet. We're a country which doesn't even speak a common language. So you have these many groupings that are in the geographical area called Uganda. But in terms of culture, in terms of faith, in terms of, we are still working at it, forging it, but we are not yet there. Identity of Uganda, we have aspirations, we have objectives in our national constitution, which are good, which are ideal, but I don't know how many know even about them. They're in English, we haven't translated them into our local languages. How many Ugandans have actually read the Constitution and have internalized it? So, in a way, we are still scattered in terms of thinking. We should be grouped together to forge a common direction. And one of the important rallying point is faith. If you don't have a dominant faith guiding or becoming the meta-narrative or being the ideological compass, you are going to have challenges rallying together to move in a certain direction because you don't even agree on which direction to move.
Reverend, you spoke about a nation and a country. What's the difference?
A country and a nation. Country, geographical area, but a nation are a people.
A oneness of people.
Yes.
If we lack identity, do we have values?
Yes, we do. These people we have different values. The anchor points are what is different. Do you know the way you've assembled us here and the way you've defined Uganda in the introduction? This percentage are Christian, this percentage are Muslim. Even within the Christian fraternity, we have our own individual denominational differences and emphasis. But generally, we are Christian, we are Muslim, we are other. That other is another category. So, once you don't have an ideological dominant direction or culture in terms of numbers, which forms the ethical foundation of a country, and you are still debating, you are not yet there.
Reverend, you talk about identity and values, and we're not yet there. But a country like the US, they have principles. Wouldn't those principles galvanize a country to become a nation?
The US, on the surface, they have the predominant Protestant ethos that forms the foundation for business, for politics, for education. In Uganda, we have been attempting, we are not yet there. But the US also, internally, they have very, very serious contradictions, especially dealing with the indigenous people who were suppressed, who are trying to come up, but the popular media may not pick them. But generally, the US has a Christian, Protestant, ideological framework which guides the politics, at least for the last 400 or so years.
Okay, let me come to Sheikh Juma. Sheikh, looking at the moral compass, looking at we're a country and not a nation, and when you look at Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, where you are from, does this country, have you had any impact on the population in this country as a fraternity or as a body?
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I do not want to look at this matter in an abstract way. I want us to look at the reality of our country, Uganda. People refer to Uganda as a secular country. But when I look at the composition of the people in Uganda, I look at Uganda as a multi-religious country. There is nobody you can find in any sphere of life without a religion, in most cases. He is either Catholic or a Protestant or born again or a Muslim. That is our composition. If you look at our national anthem, you will see that Uganda is a godly country. That we say, oh Uganda, may God uphold thee. We lay our future in thy hands, which means we accept God. Now that's where now the issue of the role of religious bodies. What is the role of the religions in the, do we affect, do we influence the behavior of the people in our country? To what extent? I think we should, I want to look at it in that, in that perspective. You find that there is need of a cooperation between the flag, the cross, and the crescent. If that cooperation is set well and we move together, then I think most of the issues that we are talking about would not happen. You see, we are becoming like religious leaders in Uganda are becoming like the story of Jonah. When Jonah went to his people to Nineveh and they were not listening to him, there was a difference between what he says and what people are doing. He thought the people are wrong. And he decided to move away from the people, thinking that actually God will punish them for not listening to him. But instead, God punished him for not doing what he's supposed to do. Because when leaders fail to solve a problem, the problem becomes the leader, and the leader becomes the problem. And that is exactly what is happening in Uganda today. I want, you see, when you open on news, you find, in most cases, you hear about ghost schools, ghost teachers, ghost districts. There's in Tungamo, there's ghost
Health workers.
Ghost, ghost circles. You understand? Now ask yourself, are these people, are these ordinary people, ordinary peasants doing that? No. You'll find that these are the cream of the nation. They are people who hold very important responsibility in this country. Look at the Karamoja Mabatis. Are these done by young people because they are poor? No. These are senior citizens doing all this. But why all this? To me, I want to go back to our education system, because there is a common say that a nation cannot be more better than its education system. So if you look at all that is happening, then you think there is a problem with our education system. Why? Because our education system is not prepared to develop the hearts of the people. It is only prepared to develop the domain, the intellect domain, the brain of the people. And yet brain is limited to 5 senses: to see, to hear, to smell, to taste, and to feel. Beyond this, the brain doesn't go there. So we have, our system should be able to touch the brains of the people, but also touch the hearts. But you'll find that religious education, which is supposed to mold the morals of the people, is considered optional. Mm-hmm. While other subjects are considered compulsory. You go to class when it is time when it's time for biology, chemistry, you find a lot of students. When it comes to IRE, CRE, you find very few students, and others are outside. What are you doing outside? No, we are not. It is optional. We don't take it. And this is what is building the morals of the people. So now you find, what is the problem? Is it religion which is lacking in the people, or people lacking in the religion? Understand? So that is where the problem is. So you find that our children are allowed to grow in the religion, but religion is not allowed to grow in our children.
Interesting.
Wow.
Let me bring in Reverend Diana. Something he said that really caught me, and I think all the panelists have hinted on it: influence.
Yes.
A podium that the church, the mosque, religious institutions have. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, have they become events? Are you still relevant? Are you still meaningful? Or the salt has left you as religious leaders?
Well, thank you, Timothy, for that question. And indeed, you are talking about the church or the religious institutions as the salt of the earth, and that the intention is to impact people, and it's morally. From the Christian faith, I believe Jesus was a revolutionary. He started from the transformation of the mind, right? To not be conformed to the patterns of this world, be transformed, and so that you can prove what is right and what is good and what is evil. And that transformation is being limited in our small structures in which we have been given space to speak. But there is a church outside the walls. And part of our lack of influence is that every week we're impacting a church that comes to us, right? But of recent, and this is where I am at the moment, I'm recently retired, early retirement. It's a choice. Because during COVID, I recognized that there's a church outside the walls of the building that must be reached, that must hear, that must be impacted, that must be influenced. The church, I believe, as all the others have said, I mean, the education system came through us, the hospitals came through us, because actually, I don't know why we are only discussing Uganda's adversity. You talked about global adversity, and we're a global community now. When I preach, any of us here bring a word, remember our children have access to social media and the rest of the world's influences, right? As a nation, what are we promoting? Our children now know more about their rights than their responsibilities. And so, yes, in a way, we don't have our heads in the sand. I think we need to challenge ourselves to address the issues of the church outside the walls. And you talk about percentages. We are aware there are 83% Christians in Uganda. But there are those who are in love with the ideas and the ways of Christ. And there are those who are living them out in terms of impacting the nation. And so for us as religious leaders, we have a platform, right? We have a platform, and we address those who come to us. And we expect that when Timothy comes to UBC, and so is working with children living with HIV, that they are living out these values, these morals, and emphasizing, for me, my faith emphasizes right relationships. And I think most of the adversities that are around us are because we are premised on very poor relationships. We despise one another. We are fighting for power, for recognition, for status quo, for different things, and we've lost the focus for which our faith is central to our faith. It's about right relationships. It's about lifting up the dignity of others. It's about empowering others to go and live. And I think we've become quite self-centered. It's about my church. Let's repent. Yes, it's about my church. But like I said, for me, COVID, one of the adversities we had, which is global, was an eye-opener for me. And there is a church outside that the church came for. I mean, the reason the church exists is for that church outside its walls. And maybe we are failing to impact. Also, I think we're being limited in a way because people, I remember, I'm very practical, I'm a storyteller. I remember once my husband asked me, I was teaching a group beading, and he said, "Is this what you're going to do for the rest of your life?" But for me, it was about the impact of those people who were jobless and the conversations we were having round the table that were transforming their lives for the better and for them to rise up and grow in their dignity and in their strength. I can see I could go on and on, but I agree that there have been weaknesses, but also the influences around us. We are contending with a lot more than just Uganda. We're in Uganda, but a child is living as if they're in the States, with the States' values, with gender identity confusion, with, I mean, if you have to look for your child who you've taken to a good school like Nabingo, and you're looking for your S2, and you find her at the airport. Her dream is out there, and she doesn't even recognize that she's being trafficked. There's a whole new area that needs to be addressed even as the church. Because what is happening around us is very different from what happened when the gospel came to us, and we were just building up structures and nations and values. Now, rights have become a big thing.
and let me stay with the two of you. And you have hinted on something that also I'd like Apostle Grace, when I get to him, to be able to respond to. Factions. Isn't the religious institution or institutions tearing the body apart? Especially when you look at, we belong to this faction, the number of people you want in your church. Basically, the pressure is on the number of people you have to have in your church. Which faction do I sit in? What kind of car do I drive as a religious leader? Here we have Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, but we have the Gaddafi wing, we have the Chibuli wing. Aren't you the people causing the pain to Ugandans, especially tearing them apart with these different factions over status, materialism? I'll start with you, Doctor, then come to Sheikh Juma.
Thank you for calling me doctor, but it's not my title.
Sorry,
I'm
Reverend.
canon. I'm canon if you want to give me some status, but it's okay. People usually call me Rev D. And by the way, it's purposeful when I call myself Rev D. I want to be approachable. I want to impact anybody in the community. You're right. When we listen to the teaching of the church sometimes, we've lost the initial focus.
Sorry, let me add this to it.
Okay, but you don't.
I'm going to still give you,
Okay.
because a thought has come to me. As religious leaders, one gets a podium for influence.
Yes.
But you use it to insult others. And this has happened a lot with tearing each other as leaders. Not just the Christians, but also the Muslims. So, aren't you the people causing the pain to Ugandans, especially with the way you're utilizing the platforms that you have?
I stand here on behalf of my fellow religious leaders and say that we have wounded one another. When you say, aren't you? We always remember the church is beyond, the leader. But yes, we have the point of influence. I think sometimes we have lost the focus. For us, Christ came to deal with sin, and sin is at the core of most of these adversities that we're looking at. Whether it be climate change, whether it's about identity confusion, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's sin is at the core. And then we are called to transform, to bring transformation to the mind so that the person goes out and treats another person with dignity. Even if we have a different truth, we still, I think, can make the moral choice to bring forth what we believe without tearing down another person.
Okay.
And so, yes, that has happened, and I've heard it, but I don't want to say that everybody is doing it. There are people who are loving, lifting, carefronting people. I've created new words, carefronting people, because their main focus is to see lives that are transformed, that are dignified, that can play their role in this nation and can fulfill their purpose and call in this life.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Sheikh Juma, there are two factions within the Muslim fraternity. When it comes to land grabbing and issues of land, it almost sheds blood. Aren't you causing pain to the factions in there, especially the population that follows you, by putting these factions there?
Well, you see, before 1972, there were factions in the Muslim community, and these factions were being fueled by difference in ideology. When some sheikhs come from Saudi Arabia, others study in Pakistan, others study in Egypt, others study where. When they come back, they have that kind of difference, and that one had influenced the division. And then that time, of course, the government did little to see that the community in the country move in the right direction. But in 1971, when Idi Amin took over, and in 1972, he ordered that no, your division and quarrels is also causing insecurity in the government. So the government saw it as a source of insecurity, and it is because they say insecurity anywhere is a threat to security everywhere. And that's how they brought he brought in a neutral organization that should bring all the Muslims together, uniting Muslims together. That is where Uganda Muslim Supreme Council came up. And it worked for that time. But this time, in his absence now, these divisions seem to be taking again another route. And the issue is when the power of love is replaced by the love for power. That's where now the issue of division come in. So you find that people now move from a state of unity to state of disunity. Yet the Quran is very clear on issues of division. The Quran says that division will never make you grow. It is only unity that can make you grow. That wala tafarraq, and never divide. You can have difference in thinking, in your ideas, but don't make a division in your religion. So that's where you find that these problems are also accruing, coming together.
So
But I think it's not a big problem as such, because you remember there used to be factions where there's a group called Symbiotic. They are also handling their own affairs. There is the Tabligh also handling their own affairs. Then there is Chibuli faction on their own, and then Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, that is the headquarters have been. But now you can see that it has been reduced now. Now the Tabligh faction has already joined in the unity of Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, now moving together. The Symbiotic has already dropped their swords, now they are together. And now even the Chibuli faction are now trying to, individually they are coming back. So we are in the state of rehabilitating our unity. And we are coming to that, because it is not one day. Destruction can take place one day, because it doesn't need skilled people to destroy. Anybody can make a destruction, but it is construction that needs skills. So now we are using those skills to bring back those broken factions together.
Let me bring in Reverend Geoffrey.
Yes.
When you hear what Sheikh Juma has spoken about and Rev D there, especially with the factions, with the platforms you have received as religious leaders, and getting to tear the body of Christ apart with the different things you say about each other, aren't you part of the problem as religious leaders?
Well, each person is responsible for their actions. If you're a leader and you commit a mistake, unfortunately, the ripple effects may reach farther away. But each individual is responsible to God as an individual, but also responsible for their actions. Yes, if you are a religious leader and you are involved in something wrong, the consequences impact more people. That's the reality. But you are assuming factions are totally bad, because St. Paul, where it is the truth and you can't agree, you agree to disagree where truth is concerned. And on the essentials, we promote unity. The non-essentials, we promote freedom. But in all, we promote love. But remember, we are not creating heaven on earth. This is still the devil's world. It is still a contested area. Yes, the kingdom of God has broken, but is not yet consummated. So this contested area, we are at war. This is the church militant. We are fighting. Some of the battles are within individuals. Some are in the systems of the world. So this is the church at war. I can assure you, if the churches were not operating, the situation would have been worse. It is not yet perfect, but it would have been worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Apostle Grace, let's get to the consecration that happened yesterday. A body has come together, but we have very many bodies around. We have the miracle churches, Pentecostal Assemblies of God. and all these churches are there. You seem to be trying to populate and have many people in each congregation, rather than what Sheikh Juma said, the heart. What is the state of the heart of the people you are dealing with?
Well, firstly, I'm going to sound a little bit divergent, but I'll qualify it. I have never thought that factions have really been the problem, but the maturity to handle the divisions and the responsibility. I think Reverend Diana spoke about the responsibility that comes with power. I could say, I think sometimes we have to zoom out to see this, because if we just go, case upon case, we usually lose the bigger picture. And allow me please use the reference of scripture. One time the Apostle Paul, he quotes an experience where he finds that there were some which were preaching Christ, but with contention. That was one faction. Another one was preaching Christ of indifference. There were different kinds of factions within, preaching their own understanding, you see. And he actually adds that this actually pressed so much on the church. He says they added more pain to my bones. They complicated the work that should have been simplified if they were one in understanding and unity. But ultimately, he has to zoom out from a place of maturity and say, okay, whether there is contention or we're preaching Christ in the right pattern, yes, he's preached. This is not him saying that I'm comfortable with the divisions, but I'm mature enough to work with the indifferent and the immature, yet to carry them on a journey, because a particular point happens in life where some of the divergent ones eventually later come to the realization, maturation. Look at, for example, world history. And let's look at, Middle East. There was a time you look at Israel, and almost every every country around Israel is at war with it. Lebanon, Jordan, and all these, Syria. And everybody's against it, United Arab Emirates, and all through Egypt. At one particular point, they did not know how to coexist. But it was an issue of a young nation that had just been, placed in the equation of a narrative that it never knew how to exist. And it needed a time and process with its neighbors to adjust, mutate, evolve, to know how to work with others as well as others learning to work with it. Right now, as I'm speaking, Egypt has made peace with Israel. Jordan has made peace with Israel. United Arab Emirates, as we have heard recently, Netanyahu was speaking in the UN, they're almost close to having peace with the United Arab Emirates. Whoever knew that we'll live in a season where Israel would be at peace with the United Arab Emirates? You see, but we're seeing that happen. Why? Because I believe, in the second point I'm trying to emphasize, that some things require a certain place of maturity. Look at, for example, the Balokole. How old is the Balokole movement in Uganda? How far does it stretch, if you know? How long do we say that our flames can be defined in this equation of our calendar? You'll realize that probably I think for me, I'm more cognizant of the 79 Chiwempe movement, 40-year span that really spells this clearly of the Balokole movement. Before that, there was a mixture of, we had the Church Missionary Society, we had a mixture of the Protestant people within that system, and some actually come out of that. Now look at the church minus, Pentecostal, all this, and look at the church for its time and existence here. Let's begin from Edward Joe Church, 1926, the East African Revival. Let's start that journey and see. You'll see that there has been, honestly, a place of maturity that has been required. It's like a nation, Uganda. How many years are we? 60-something years old?
61.
Yes. What you expect for a nation to be at 60-something years old is not the same level you'd expect a nation to be which has probably been existent with all its systems functioning, perfect or imperfect, for 400 or 500 years. There are things you find that they have matured into. So what I believe, for example, look at this consecration issue. There was a time, yes, the factions were there, we can agree, but I saw the leader of Born Again Faith Federation, Pastor Joseph Sarada, attending. Our elder, Miao, was there in attendance. that was telling us something in the understanding that yes, there is division, but we're coming to celebrate these people. This is another group, National Fellowship of Born Again Pentecostal Christians. They've come together, but these are people from different factions coming together to celebrate one group. That's a plus. That's what Sheikh was trying to say. There was a time some of these factions in the Muslim faith were not communicating. There was a time when we were growing up, we used to think, hey, is there a peace between Namirembe Hill and All Saints? You see what I'm saying? But that's not a conversation now that we have. I think there is a place of maturity that is required, and we are on a journey. Please understand that even though we are anointed by God, we are imperfect. And I must apologize to all that are watching us, that we're imperfect beings too anointed. We have our own flaws as human beings, and we are all a work in progress, whether I'm a man of God or otherwise. Of course, we're held in high places of accountability because we're leading our own people. Such forums are reconciling these things, and thank you for bringing such conversations. I believe as we continue, probably there was a time it was even hard for us to be able to sit on this table. But the fact that we are sitting, there's a journey, and I'm celebrating that.
And I'm glad you said there's a journey. If I get to Professor Sarah, Ephesians 1:23 talks about how the church is peripheral from the world.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at some of the things that at that consecration were there, statements like the revolution will not stop, will continue it. Meaning the standard has come down to where the revolution is. Why is it seemingly that religious leaders are becoming partisan? Especially when we get to elections, politics, they tend to align. I have seen quotations by some saying, if you don't help me with building the church, we shall not give you a vote. Why is this happening? Especially trading what you're supposed to be doing as a moral fiber to getting popularity and materialism from the state.
I think I'll borrow what the man of God, Biarugaba, said, that I think some people are accountable of their own actions. I would say this is why, but that would be me judging a heart that I have not sat on this set to examine exactly why it goes in the course it does. It would be wrong to say that a religious leader does not have the right to say that this is who I want according to my own convictions and the things we see. You see, because it takes us back to, again, I'm saying, the values. As of whether somebody out there agrees that what these religious leaders ascribe to is right or wrong. Again, it goes back to the judgment of that individual to be able to support that. I could have an individual bias. I could incline to you because you one time paid the fees of my son, and perhaps be very blinded to the bigger picture. Again, that's why I said, for me, it's a place of maturity that does not necessarily, and again, the faith does not necessarily come with age. It comes with experience, learning from experiences, because I can be old at where I'm at, but I have not learned from my past experiences. And the exposure that is so desired to mature me as an individual. So for me, I would prefer, when it comes to that conversation of why would they choose to be, partisan, I think they're also Ugandans. And they have the right to say, I think this is my course or direction, because, do you want them to be opposition? Do you want them to be for the ruling party? That's not a conversation I think you and I are going to win.
Let's leave it at that. Let me come to Professor. Professor, looking at religious institutions, looking at religious leaders in this country, they've talked about maturity, Apostle Grace, and different influences that they have there. When you look at the influence that they have, and looking at the influence that the state is having on them, someone once joked and said, can't the church really buy a Pajero? Can't the church really buy this, that they have to wait for such a handshake for a roof and all these things? The fusion between the state and the religious institution seems to have the state override the institutions. Why is this happening now? And can they stand on their own as religious institutions?
Thank you very much, Timothy. I think this is where I started from by saying, actually, the religious institutions came first and the states arose from there. Or the states, the fusion between the church or between I don't know very much about the mosque, so I'll be forgiven. but between the church and state has always been there. For example, we are predominantly Christian because we were colonized by a Christian country. If we had been colonized by Saudi Arabia, the 84% she's talking about wouldn't be Christianity, it would be Muslim. So that already shows you about the church and the state moving together. Someone talked about nation building and the church. When you read about the stories in the Bible and the conquests, these were kings. They were taking territory, but also imposing a way of life and a way of worship. So it is in these modern times that people have tried to distinguish the two. But these are facts of society, that a society has a political organization, it has an economic organization, it has a cultural organization, and it has a religious organization. That religious organization could be Islam, it could be Christianity, it could be traditional, whatever, it could be Hindi, wherever people are. I mean, they believe in other Hinduism. So these are, I mean, we should not over-imagine. Someone talked about us not being abstract. I think let us understand how society functions. That society has these beings that move together. Now, fast forward to Uganda. Of course, we were colonized by the British, so most of our leaders have been predominantly Anglican, apart from President Idi Amin and some few stints by others. Ben Chwanuka, I think, was a Catholic. So we have largely been moving this way. And for a long time, it was the organized religions, Protestants, Catholics, Muslims, and the others. Now, what these three have is they have a long history of being organized. By the organized organized religion, if you Google it, it dates back to 11,000 years around the Middle East. So thereafter, people have been organizing, of course, living traditional ways and aspiring to better ways as they have been conquered, okay? Conquests have always brought on board other religions. If you read the history of Islam, I mean, the prophet took out a lot of things which were paganism and something new came into place. The Romans conquered a lot of Europe, and then we have the kind of organization. Then they conquered the rest of us, and then we have the kind of organization we are. So some of these things have had a long history, and I wouldn't see the factions as really a problem. They are part of growth. There's a time when the whole Christian body was Orthodox, then it became Catholic, then for some reason they decided the Anglican faith came out of that because of some disagreements. A lot of these are doctrinal, but also a lot of those are also secular things, like territory, like power, like people. A lot of us who have grown up with the born-again movement later, we know a lot of the springboard was US. And why the US? Because those were marginalized by state religions endorsing inequality of a racial nature could not go back to those religions. So they went into other things, whether it's Baptist, Pentecostalism, and others, because they couldn't go back to Protestantism, which had actually been the vanguard of conquering the US and taking on the slavery as we know it. So people will always disagree with certain organizations. I think what matters is, can we have some point of commonality? And like what you saw, of course, what we need to study really what happened in Kololo yesterday. And this becomes an interesting case because part of the reason born-agains come up is because, at least when we were growing up, was the disagreement with the way organized religion is, the imagination that you're structuring God in a particular order, that for us we are led by the Spirit, and we don't have to go to certain steps of theology, because if the Lord baptizes you with the Spirit and commands you to preach, you don't need to go to Mukono, which was Bishop Tucker at the time, you don't. So out of that, it became very much preached about the covenant is between me and my God. Okay, so I understand. So he cannot judge me, and that's what he's saying. You know, you cannot judge because you were not at the table. But of course, that also led to disorganization. Okay, and currently you have a state which prefers to deal with organized things. The organization of the state you are seeing, it's not just actually in religion. You've seen also tribes that never had kingdoms, trying to form kingdoms so as to access the state, because the state will say, "Who do we deal with? You are this tribe, you don't have a leader, so if you claim that Uganda is being advantaged, for you, who do we talk to?" So you see now those tribes are also getting together. So now the state has been really talking to Protestants, to Catholics, to Muslims. Then others, we felt we were left out. So can you organize yourselves? So are you Pentecostals? Are you Seventh-day Adventists? Are you whatever? So you are becoming to see this. So for me, I don't see this as the state co-opting the church. But I think the church is organizing itself so as to receive support from the state. And this support, I wouldn't say that the church cannot afford a Pajero. I think many churches can afford Pajeros. But I think for those who cannot afford Pajeros, they should be given. We've seen kingdoms being given Pajeros. Actually, most kingdoms are running in state Pajeros. So if you come to churches that are having the biggest bulk of the people, I think getting Pajeros, there is no harm. But I think other than looking and judging the church by organizing so as to get a Pajero, let us look at the service religious organizations are doing. But we should not live here thinking that these factions are a problem. These factions are a way people reflect the disagreements. I may be together with Pastor Apostle Rubega, but maybe we don't agree on certain things, but which are not fatal. So maybe some of us want to pray throughout the night, others want to pray only in certain section hours. So these are differences, which for us we've always believed as long as the body of Christ grows. So it is growing. And I think it is better to be accommodative than to try to straitjacket people, because that's why you have religious wars. People say, for us, we pray in this particular way, so anyone other than that is a problem. But we should also not forget that beyond the doctrinal things, people are disagreeing over secular things. And it's not just greed, power, and money. But sometimes someone said about a problem of leadership. If the leaders don't live a life that inspires the people, some people will break off. They will have a problem in their heart, really going to that. So they will end up finding a community where they will worship their God unencumbered by the leader's conduct. So there are very many things in this, but it's not the church capturing, the state capturing religious institutions. I think that division is a modern day division, but they've always moved together. And that's why when you read most of the holy books, I don't know much about the Quran, but the others talk about praying for the state and vice versa, so that there's peace in the land. So I think let's look at it that way.
Thank you very much. A lot of feedback coming through and questions being asked, but the one I would like to respond to, someone is asking, why haven't you invited the Catholic Church to be able to be part of the panel to discuss this? We actually did, and they didn't show up. So that's something we'll be getting to in a short while. But let's take a break, not the Pajero, but a break and come back after.
Water, please. Can I pay with Momo?
No.
Ha. Hey, can I pay with Momo? Ha.
Here's our merchant
Oh, very good.
7 Mecca?
20. Can I pay with Momo?
Unfortunately, no.
Ha. Baby, let's go.
When paying with MTN Momo comes with more benefits for everyone, it just doesn't make sense not to have it.
Hello, I've come for rent.
Can I pay with Momo?
Yes, you can.
Pay or shop with MTN Momo and get cashback every week. It's free of charge. Use the Momo app or dial *165 *3#.
Tata ni Mama Sarah.
Wanji?
We did all we could. Naye we couldn't save her. I'm sorry. You brought her in very late. Malaria destroyed her organs and reduced her blood levels. She was anemic. You know how dangerous malaria is. I am sorry, but malaria has killed your daughter.
Malaria kills more people in Uganda than any other disease. Protect your loved ones from this enemy. Ensure everyone in your family sleeps under a mosquito net every night, whether it's a cold or hot season, to protect them from malaria. In the event that any of your family members shows malaria signs and symptoms, take them to the nearest health center immediately to prevent complications from malaria that could result into death. Together, we can chase malaria out of Uganda. This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Health with support from Global Fund.
What's the best kind of business to invest in? One that connects Ugandans border to border with the high-speed broadband 4G and is the first to launch 5G? What about one of the largest corporate income taxpayers in our country? Oh, the fastest growing telecom in the last 5 years. Wow! Well, here's a chance to invest in it all. Take part in Airtel's initial public offering today for as little as 100 Ugandan shillings per share. Remember, a retail investor gets 5 incentive shares for every 100 they buy and 6 incentive shares if they purchase using Airtel Money. Dial star 185 star 85 hash now to get started.
Juko. Yo. What you go? Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that.
Okay.
The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Are you tired of high fees and slow transfer time when sending money? Airtel Money is here to revolutionize the way you move your money. We have revised our rates back to ground. Sending money from Airtel to other networks in Uganda, East Africa, and to the rest of the world has never been more affordable. Dial star 185 hash and start sending money. Switch to Airtel Money today and experience unbeatable rates and top-notch services for all your local and international money transfer needs. Airtel Money, instant, secure, borderless.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. I'm joined by a panel of religious leaders, but also our academic, Professor Sarah, and we're discussing everything religion, religious institutions, and what they're doing, especially in time of crisis. A lot of messages coming through, especially on the pains that young people are facing, and those are the discussions we're going to get into. Governance, and talk about corruption and all these areas, education, not just any education, but the quality of education we have in this country. Professor, let me start with you. Someone sends a message that really says, we as young people left religious leaders and religious institutions. We are money-minded and looking at acts of homosexuality to just make money. So I thought I should throw that one in and be able to start the conversation there. As an academic, when you look at religious institutions and look at the state and the fusion they have had, who holds the other accountable? Who tries to manage the other or influence legislation, something that you said earlier on? And can religious institutions be able to be the reflection of what the state should look like?
Well, thank you very much. I think what happens, with regard to who holds the other accountable, I think their relationship is symbiotic. And to understand this relationship, you have to understand Uganda as a society. Now, we talked about the origins before, and we can put that to rest. But time came when, with the structural adjustment problems, HIV, wars, really it was the religious institutions that looked after the people, that gave people hope. Actually, if it wasn't for religious institutions today, I don't know where Ugandans would be. But they have helped cushion people and make them more resilient. So that is one. But then fast forward, I think these two have been courting each other. One, the state loves a following. It loves a constituency because we are into elective politics. And these religious houses have followers. So they court them. But also the fact that we are in a system where life is unpredictable, because we're here talking about global adversity. The global adversity has not just started with COVID. Structural adjustment took out any aspect of welfare and of the state looking after the people. So it's largely religious institution. Joblessness, you'd have a job, permanent and pensionable, got erased, we all went contract, so life is so unpredictable. So it is the religious institutions that provide that. So the more people go to the religious institutions, you have those that are already established, like where Canon comes from, with their own political and power base and financial base. That is a good thing. But then you have those where, even as poor as we are, we have to support each other and move. But so if in that case, you have a state that is willing to support you, there is no problem. So you've ended up saying, so if the state is going to give things to churches that it understands, it goes there every day and gives them something. So those who do not have that kind of access then have to get organized to do that and have to be seen to sometimes be supporting the state or saying what the state wants to hear. But even then, that is not really a problem. The problem is that the relationship is symbiotic. The state wants what the religious houses have, and that's the people, and that's the votes. That's why towards the election time, you'll see how many politicians pray, even those who have not been praying. They will be from one church to another, to another, to another, okay? So that is one. But as they do that, the people are also saying, of course, I mean, it is interesting, I go to sometimes the Anglican system. If you go to the villages, the moment you're there as a visitor, they will do a fundraising. Because that's an opportunity to make money. Not really to make money in the wrong way, but that's the only opportunity they can get something bigger. And it's normally for a genuine cause. It is to build a church because the other side is leaking. It is to support the community school. So why is that important and why do they behave like that? Because maybe when we liberalized, there's concentration of growth in cities and rural areas have been left behind. And yet that's where the majority of people are. But as that has progressed, we've also built churches as enterprises. I don't know much what is happening in the mosques, but the churches have become powerful enterprises. And by being powerful enterprises, they tend to pay attention, and I'm saying this in general terms, I know there are differences. There seems to be a lot of attention paid to those who will invest in the enterprise, okay? And so that's where the younger people are falling out. And I think there is a problem there that needs to be fixed. Many of the younger people feel detached from, you see the quarrel they have with the political system, that the system is clogged. They have a similar quarrel with our religious houses. Because, for example, if you're like me, you grew up in St. Francis in Makerere, when it was a student's church, even when you are working and you're staying, whether you're staying in Entebbe or Jinja, you feel you should pray in St. Francis. So what does that mean to the younger people who are, because that church is established as a university church. It could be Kakumba Chapel in Chambogo. They established like children's church. But if we who were the younger people of 20 years ago have refused to leave, where then do we leave space for those kids to breathe? So you have that, and yet when the religious people speak, they speak as if society has been constant. They seem like the value systems that informed us have been constant. There doesn't seem to be an appreciation of the challenges younger people are facing today. So those who are deviant are told of clearly as being deviant other than understanding the problems they're coming from. So they feel a disconnect, they feel they don't really relate. And then you see the church seeming to be more detached from the people. Many more people are not going to churches, but of course they are the trendy ones, like for Apostle Rubega. all our younger people are going there, so you better shepherd them very well. So you have that. So at the end of the day, younger people feel the leadership of the church and the state are driving one agenda, and then There are those adults there who are simply talking down at them, and then for them, they are simply chatting their ways. But I don't believe younger people are busy looking for money and they're engaged in vices. Many younger people are very religious. Maybe that's why Sheikh has to tell us how they have contained their younger people, because the younger people in their faith are very faithful and religious and keep to the Friday prayers and everything. Probably there's something to learn from there. So I think the relationship is symbiotic. Everyone is exploiting the other.
Okay.
They all have clear interests, and they know how those interests are going to be met. If you want what I have, you'll deliver something.
Apostle, let's get into the pains. This country loses about 10 billion shillings in corruption, and even more. Let me also give you a personal story. Drove a car, was scratched by a taxi. One jumps out and says, "Banyankule mwetu wabako." I'm from the east. Looks could be deceptive. These corruption, tribalism sentiments, where is the place for religious leaders like yourself to be able to call them out? And how do you call them out?
Yes, I think I'm again going to use the analogy of, from again Christian perspective. You look at Christianity as a body of Christ. Reverend Jayana spoke of the church within the walls and the church without the walls. That you have a church, like I said, the people who come to us and follow the order, you know, they understand the order of service and everything that takes place from there. But I think the ultimate question is, when will they leave the church and go out into the world where these things actually mostly exist? And not that you don't have corruptions in churches or, you know, religious institutions, that granted we have. But again, my point is now we're talking about, you know, the world as we behold it. Ultimately, I find that I want to stick to the discourse of every part supplying its own part, like the Bible tells us that there might be no schisms or divisions. The heart does something different from the eyes do something different from the hands, and the hands do something different from the feet. If you, for example, said that we need the church to be an active voice in advocacy, or, you know, to help us fight certain injustices, you know, through the legislative arms of the law, whether you want it or not. Probably my foundation of administrative law is not sufficient enough to stand on certain platforms to be able to fight. But if I can empower whoever I'm supposed to empower to put the principles that you know that are relevant for them to translate that in the language that is understood according to, you know, their credentials, then I have done my part. So there is a politician, for example. His job is to say no to this, and then he'll go probably and do things that maybe are not becoming of me as a religious leader. Again, you're catching me here because you're saying you're siding with this political party. You know, at the end of the day, I'm also questioning the place of wisdom to tell, according to my part as a religious leader, I can speak this far, I can do this and I can do that, but what by the wisdom of the book are my boundaries in this liberty that I have to express myself as a human being, you know? In the Anglican Church, there was one wonderful man of God who was, you know, teaching his word, but then he felt that he perhaps needed to pursue a political career. What did he do? He relinquished himself of the responsibilities of the church because he knew the risks that were going to come with that, and he went head on. So it's also not fair to say that I'm going to do everything, you know. It's not fair that the church is going to do everything. I think the part is that we lay the principles down according to what the word is, because probably I have this politician on Sunday or on Thursday and empower them. Some have said, no, I think I'm going to let go of this and then go that way. Yes, because every game has its own rules, you know. If for example, I cannot be a taxi driver, if I have to, then not on a Sunday morning, you see. The rules of engagement will not allow me to do that when I'm supposed to be preaching on a Sunday morning. I can do that maybe on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So I want to also believe that there are different parts of the body that help us do this, and our part really is to give the principles. But also allow me to do this, to express this before probably we go to the next speaker. The challenge has been, I think Professor Sarah said something there that I felt we should really emphasize most, is that now you have this triangle. You have the triangle, for me, scripture, which is my Bible, my sheikh has his Quran. Then you have reasoning, how people are reasoning, and their consciences. They're shifting every day, you know, according to how society evolves and mutates. Then you have the cultures that come with the shifting consciousnesses, right? You have the pressure of industrialization, for example. How you were in the coal, in the first industrial revolution, when you're doing coal and steam engines, and then in the second industrial revolution, and then in the third when you enter internet and nuclear, I believe, and now you're in artificial intelligence, you're in augmented reality, you're in robotics, you are in the Internet of Things, you're in big data, you're in the battery, you are or in gene coding. These things, trust me, whether we want it or not, I can speak for the church. Many of us have not really acquainted ourselves with where the world is going. So even in some of the vices we see in society, it's hard to reconcile some of these things because we don't even yet have the language to explain the context in which these things are happening. You know, today you hear a nation like the United States and they say, oh, there was this, Trump has gone to court, he's suing people because they rigged elections. America, okay, I would understand that world, but America, how do they explain that? They are going to go in the court of land, explain how the algorithms were manipulated to favor this person. It's not our definition of rigging, you know. I think for me, ultimately, either as a church, we need to empower ourselves to train, to adapt to whatever is coming through, but yet not compromising on truth, because it's then that probably we have more answers to give when we're empowering the people who come to sit before us to go out and change the world. But every joint must supply and every part must do its part.
Apostle, you're ring fencing with the Bible and saying this is it. But these very same people are in the congregation of either the mosque or the church. And they're leaving the church after putting up and waving holy hands, but they're going out to really infringe on someone else's well-being. Iron sheets, for example, the plight of the people in Karamoja, the children on the street, this corruption we're talking about. Don't you feel religious leaders have a place to be able to call out this and say, you know what, this is the truth of what is happening, and we need to call it out for the people that are doing it?
100%. And I think that's why I would call upon, you know, those that are watching with us, that we have to be able to speak. I know some who are actually speaking, they're just not being heard. I know many religious people calling out these people every Sunday morning. I know many religious people who are even going on the streets and, you know, driving to sit down with these people personally to question this, you see, to shun and say this is evil. But like I said, they're not being heard. Why? Because at the end of the day, I have seen with my, I'm not as old as many of my panelists here, but I can speak from where I'm speaking from, you know. I've not been long enough, and my elders here can help us, correct us. We have had experiences where people have actually been killed. We have had, history has showed us of religious people who have actually been killed for some of these things. Whether you're talking of Uganda or the global narrative, go down to the South African story, you'll see these things. Yes, people are speaking. I think ultimately the question is it just enough to hold a religious person accountable? Because you have all these estates. You have your clergy, you know, but you also have the noble, you have the commoner, you have, you know, the peasant, you know. I'm using the medieval, you know, Western, you know, stages of, or what do they call them?
Development. Yes,
stages of development. I think we are doing our part. And again, I own up that maybe we're not doing enough, okay? That's why, again, I thank God for such forums, because we have the opportunity to speak. And again, I have the opportunity to tell our leaders who are watching out there that maybe we need to speak a bit more. Maybe we need to speak a bit more.
But Timothy.
Yes, Reverend.
You know, it's not just the religious institutions or leaders who are actors in this game. There's a key actor called government or state. And this one has tools, has institutions that should be addressing that. So one of the challenges we have, or we should be working on, is strengthening institutions that check each other for the welfare of our citizens. But the church or the religious institutions have the space, but they are key actors also. And these seem to have even more mandate with clout and tools and a sword to enforce. So if I speak, there should be somebody else who is responsible for action that should actually act.
I agree with you, Reverend. And but these same actors, like Apostle said, are not the building or the institution. They are the people that come to your congregation. And to be able to call out these plights for ordinary Ugandans. When you look at the street children that were being picked up this week, when you look at the number of children that have not gone to school, when you look at teenage pregnancies that Rev D was dealing with during COVID, still dealing with now, you have a platform for both the people that have the influence. They are your congregation, you are their shepherd. Have you done enough to be able to influence the end of such vices? Because if they don't end, like you said, they could end the country.
The duty of the influencer is also limited, because the influence or the intended to be influenced has a choice. And as long as man has free will that he exercises in daily decisions, yes, you can speak, you can show the way, but they have a duty to internalize what has been shared with them and actually appropriate it. Where there's success, and as I said earlier, actually it would have been worse. But of course we are not yet there. But you imagine a country with no conscience, where it is to whom it may concern, it would have been worse. Of course we desire a better situation, but it would have been worse without the action or the saltness that is brought about by the religious institutions.
Reverend, before I get to Sheikh Juma, these are numbers that really, just yesterday, NSSF put out 10% for returns for those that are serving with it. But when you hear lines like 1 Kenyan is equal to 3 Ugandans, when you hear lines like we are not honest people, that when we get to work, we try to find very meandering ways to be able to achieve all this wealth in the shortest time possible. When you see young people in betting places, don't you get concerned to have these young people, a population that is 75% under 35, doesn't this concern you to be able to do something about this unemployment in this country?
It's definitely a big concern, the way the economy is organized. When I even see the way we reward teachers, or the way we reward medical doctors and medical personnel who take care of our health, there's a challenge. But Uganda is a small economy. The global reality is also impacting on us. The structural adjustment program, which was imposed on us, it broke down our social security net. Now we are really struggling. This level of unemployment, which may not be particularly Ugandan alone, but generally there is a challenge. Our population is growing faster than the economic growth. There's a challenge. The way it is even organized in terms of sharing this which is produced. So we need to address production. Some of the programs that we have designed on our Gagawale, on our college, we should actually address production. How are we organized as an economy in producing goods and services before we talk of sharing it out? What are the factors of production? Who has the means to organize the economy? Still, government has the bigger role in organizing society to produce wealth. The church and the religious institutions are actors who have the space, and I think we have been cooperating. We have schools that train and help skill people, but there is something which we don't have authority over, and hoping that the people we influence, our parishioners, take their faith into the marketplace. But that is hoping. It is hoping, and sometimes it doesn't come out as desired. But yes, it is a challenge with this level of unemployment, if there's a disgruntlement, and even the ethic to work. You know, if you have work, are you really working? And that is a religious matter. Some people approach work as a question of faith. Because work is honorable, is God ordained, and we must keep bringing that into our people. If you don't work, St. Paul said, if you don't work, you should not eat. There should be no space for laziness. If you are lazy, you are not being a good disciple. If you shun work and there's opportunity for work, you are not being a good disciple. But all the same, there are some actors that are beyond the influence of the religious institutions.
Yeah. Reverend, to be more direct, it's almost like religious leaders are shunning a role that is, especially with the ethics and the morals, of helping these young people who spend Sunday, Saturday, Friday with you to enhance this. When we look at unemployment, when we look at the number of girls who are going to the UAE, leaving this country hoping to get greener pastures on their side, and ring fencing on the Bible, on the Quran, is that all you can do as religious leaders?
Can I say something?
Yes, Dr. Diana. Reverend Diana.
Yes. I think we are speaking about what individuals can do, but there's a whole system that we need to uproot. It's no longer this nation. We're talking about looking at our education system and saying it is useless, because after I have got my degrees, where's the work? And we are telling them, create work. I've never worked before, right? And we're saying work. And people, we've moved. We are working in survival mode. And the children are saying, hey, I got my degree, I've got my PhD, I'm not employable, or I'm underemployed. So they are leaving the country. We did that in the 80s as well. People left the country. There's a system. We have religious institutions have raised leaders and have planted them in certain places, but they have been stuck because of a system that does not work, that does not deliver. So even if you're good, you're on time, you do your work, there's a rut there. And there's something that, whether it's to do with policies, like we said, we're not equipped for those things. So we are sending out good people who are being, they're disheartened. And so they go to a system that actually responds to what they have been, they've been trained for, that will accept their education system and pay them a right pay. You can't keep people. You can give them the right attitude, you can help them be resilient, you can help them have hope. But a lot of people now, they're looking at us and they're saying, it's not working. Am I going to wait till I'm 40 or 50 before anything works out for me? And we are not looking at the change. We are telling them what happened to us in the 70s. This is how we did it. And I think we need to think differently. We need to think out of the box. There's some
that is a Christian
children,
crisis.
the children, there's some children who have made it outside the box, but there's some kids who are not going to make it. They need to be working in a working system where they are supervised and they grow through the levels, because that's what we prepared them for. And so there's a frustration there. We're giving them hope, resilience, we are asking them to have the morals, but they're saying it doesn't work. And
that
so
is actually a Christian crisis. That's
yes.
why when Sheikh comes on, he should tell us, because the Sheikh's youth are not actually having much of that crisis. They have their PhDs, they have their masters. If it is working in Chiseka, which is working, you'll get them there. If it is in Chiko, but anyway, I'm not speaking for Sheikh. But we can take...
Thank you. Thank you,
Sheikh,
Professor.
let me pose this question in twofold. Let's talk about, before we get to the education that you hinted on earlier, when you hear about the killings in Masaka, Greater Masaka, they have extremists. You will hear fanatic Muslims there. And when you hear about this, if we go further to COVID, even when the Chinese were around, some countries beat them up because they thought they're the ones who carried COVID to their countries there. Is that a concern for you, for just the genuine people that are running the faith of Islam, vis-a-vis the fanatics that are extremists, trying to take it to a whole new level? How are you managing to balance that, especially as religious leaders, to create a safe and hopeful society?
Thank you, moderator. You see, we do not want to run away from the problem. You see, if we don't see the problem, if you see nothing in your face that is a problem, then you will do nothing. If you do nothing, you will plan nothing. If you plan nothing, you will change nothing. And if you change nothing, you are nothing. And if you are nothing, heaven is not for nothing. We as religious leaders, first of all, Quran did not come for perfect people, but it came to perfect people. That's why we need always to shower people with the words of God, just like rain, so that it washes down the dirt. A clean person is always that person who takes bath, who showers. You can't say, I'm clean, I'm not taking bath, then you are not clean. Always you have to be clean. Human beings, what I'm realizing in this world is that there is the force of materialism overtaking the force of spiritualism. Not because the youth are not understanding the book, but because the pace at which the age of .com is taking the children, and the method that we are using, we are still using the old method of reaching the children, when actually they are moving at a higher speed than us. That we have to change our methodology of telling people things. For example, if you tell people today that happy are the poor, for the kingdom of God belongs to them, they will say, I think something is wrong with you. They will say something is wrong with them, but something is wrong with you. In fact, we have to be balancing the spiritual life and the physical life. That's one. Because there are certain things there now, children or the young generation want to achieve. Are these things evil? Is the world evil? You cannot talk about heaven when the person is still on this earth struggling. He needs good food, good shelter, he needs to get married, and all this. That's why you see our pillar, Islamic pillar of the pillar of Islam. Islam is built on 5 pillars, and this pillar addresses both of these issues. It addresses the spiritual, and it also addresses the physical life that the person is on the earth. One is believing in Allah, which is spiritual. Then praying to Allah 5 times a day. This is spiritual. But when you come to the third one, is now paying the zakat. That's this physical. That those who are advantaged to have money or to have wealth should distribute the wealth distribution. You give it to those who do not have. That is called the zakah, which means a person who has no capital to begin something, give him the capital so that he begins. Then in another year, he will also be a contributor to another to another person. And that is how the money. And then thirdly, we say in the Islam that never ignore any job that can give you an income. The word is that yadul ulia khairu min yadu sufla, that the hand that is on top is far much better than the hand at the what? At the lower level. But at the same time, the Prophet says that this, although this one is better, but if this one comes, don't hesitate, and you have to give. I happened to go with the canon to Djibouti. Djibouti is a predominantly Muslim country, but those people, they are so poor. But what is surprising is that there is a forex bureau by individuals, women, and this along the line all night, people exchanging money, dollars. A huge dollar like this, but the person has it there without any security, without what? There is no theft. And if you find those who beg, any hand that begs will find someone to give him something, very little. Then you wonder, what type of life is this? These people are poor. Sometimes in Uganda here, may think we are poor, we are thieves because of poverty. And Madam talked about, Reverend talked about unemployment. But we are talking about those who are already employed, but they are still corrupt. We are talking about those corruption in the realm of employment. Why are people still stealing Mabati when they are the highest paid servants of this country? You understand? Now, we need to change our way of preaching. There's too much preaching, but less learning from the society, from the One time I was seeing people preaching on streets. We don't do that as Muslims. We don't teach. Okay, that's not our way of teaching. But I wanted to borrow it. Why can't we join and also do the same? But one thing I realized I do not understand is, who are they teaching? Who are they preaching to? Because people are on the street, they are moving, they are busy. This driver wants to get out of the park, and this person is here talking. Now, the audience, who is listening to that word, to the words that this person is talking? It is like we have a kind of distance between what we are saying and what people are receiving. So we need to change our mode. Now, you talked about the issue of terrorism.
Extremism versus Islam.
Versus Islam. First of all, Islam is not a religion of... Islam is not terrorism, and terrorism is not Islam. That one is out. The issue here is how our people on the capacity to tolerate certain issues. Because some of these issues that you see coming up are they are not actually religious. They are political. But somebody dresses it in a religious manner so that he gets also what? He gets sympathy from the what? From the
population.
From the population, but actually it is not. So it is our duty to tell them that actually what these people are fighting for is not actually religion. So you should distance yourself from that. Because there is that, that's why we need to work with, as Madam says, there is symbiosis. That the religious body and the government have to work together. In most cases, we have seen that we are improving into our systems because of that relationship. 100 years ago, we used to have interreligious wars in Uganda. But today we have interreligious council where we talk to one another, like we are seated here. In those days, if a Muslim a child is seen with a Bible in a hand, that one is really a disaster. But this time it is not the case. So we need to build the bridge. Between our schools today, the government comes in to say now you have a government grant aided schools. They are grant aiding, they are working with the foundation bodies. That's one.
Let's stay at the schools there. If I come to Reverend D, the quality of education, and this is an example of someone I met yesterday. UPE schools, about 10,000 to 20,000 for feeding a child per term. the quality of education that is there. And this friend of mine, really well off, takes the children to a nice school, but has been paying 10 million per term. He chose to relocate because of school. What can we do? Or what can really, because most of the schools either belong to the Anglican, Catholic, or the born again, or the Muslims. What can we do to improve the quality of education? Because employers are also complaining that the quality of children we're sending, or workers, are not good enough to be employed. What are we doing wrong, and what can we improve in our schools?
Did you ask him or
yes,
me?
Over to Sheikh Juma.
Yeah, of course, we have to accept that the quality of the education in our schools is not really, is appalling, that we need to improve into that. But there are many factors that cause that. One is the quality of the teachers. The quality of the teachers. Our TTC, PTC, NTCs are producing teachers who are not, who cannot be comparable to the first world country teachers, second world country teachers. I was, of course, third world teachers, who still do not have that perception of the modern system. Now, if the teacher has a poor quality, how do you expect the children whom he's teaching to have a better quality? That's a big problem.
But also, I think we have
Curriculum.
politicized that aid. Because if you look at the enrollment and the amount of money which we are giving, and also the timing of its release, and then you say the parent should not pay anything. No. Thank you for the assistance, but the parent should be allowed to contribute something more than they are currently doing. Because if you have a school with 300 enrollment and you have only 3 or 4 teachers that are on the payroll, it means you are saying these 4 teachers are going to teach 300 children. The rest of the teachers who are employed are going to be paid from some source. That's where the freedom contributes without government interference. We appreciate government's help. If it can be increased, thank you. If it is not increased, then allow the parents to do their job.
Reverend, let me come to you. Reverend Diana, especially when you talked about COVID, teenage pregnancies, school dropouts, a study was made, especially when I was in Gulu. I think that time Apostle was also having something up there. 10 children arrive in primary school. 2 show up in secondary school. Very lucky if even 1 shows up at university. Biggest percentage being young girls. When you look at this social issue, how can religious leaders come alongside to be able to support teenage pregnancies, high school dropout, young men that are into abuse of substance wherever it is? How are you as religious leaders coming along to support government to have these young people have a continuity?
I want to say that that's very difficult from the pulpit. It's actually labor intensive. It's actually them being able to come to you and listen and counsel and address the issues. When I was at St. Francis, our chaplain announced one Sunday, I brought in Derain to give a testimony. I interviewed him. I did a different form of preaching. Instead of me telling them about substance abuse, I brought someone who's been transformed, and I interviewed. And the chaplain announced that anyone with and addictions go to Reverend with people in my office who would never come into that church to be told that what they're doing is evil or wrong. And when we saw those things, we were seeing broken homes, people who are failing at school, people who, okay, made bad choices, people have no support system. So it was bigger than just a drug problem, a child who didn't feel loved. It was bigger than that. And the approach again, how we are bringing the message through, cannot just be behind the pulpit. I was part of Rehab Ministries, helping to take prostitutes off the street. We have a home in Kasangati. We counsel, we walk, we listen. There's the listening gospel for us is missing. We have been taught to tell people, but we don't hear, so we don't know what we are addressing. So the listening gospel needs to be there. It's what we did in the area of HIV/AIDS in that time. We walked alongside people. We had support groups, support systems, which help people find the strength and the morals to make the change that they needed to see happen in their own lives, the things they struggled with. So again, it's approach. We are addressing, when we celebrated 100 years of ministry at All Saints Cathedral in 2012, we looked at the new areas we wanted to address, and one of them we did was substance abuse. And I got people back to church who had left long ago. You're actually having conversations around this. And I heard stories I'd never heard before, which changed my way of thinking and the way I addressed the situation. And so here we were saying, talk to your parents, talk to your children about sex and what. I said, me, I have no father, I have no mother, I have no one to even talk. Or the person who's in my life doesn't even have this moral standard. So we need to listen more so that we can grow in our approach. We shouldn't stop what we're doing. It's impacting some people, but the things are changing really fast. And we too need to train and refresh and to listen and to learn from one another, so that we can make a greater impact. Alcoholism cannot be done from the pulpit.
I think I like the gospel of listening and conversation. It speaks a lot.
Difficult conversations. It's very powerful. And it's we too as leaders learn a lot from the eyes of the people who we minister to, so we can tell if we are relevant or irrelevant. Yes.
Professor, even as we draw to a close, is there anything else religious institutions and religious leaders can do, minus the books and the area they're in? What more can they do, especially to impact society, to be able to speak truth to power? Is there a place like that, and can they really stretch their influence and their spirit?
Yes, I think there's a great place where religious institutions can play a role. Timothy, I think the religious leaders in this country command much more respect from the state than any other body. So they can actually use this position to speak truth to power. They can use this position to hold the state to account. Many of their meetings we don't even need to know, but they have privileged access to the powers that be. And actually when they speak, they are taken more seriously than other people. When academics speak truth to power, you just said you're theorizing. You don't know what you're talking about. When political parties speak truth to power, they are simply demonizing the state because they want to come in. So religious institutions are these the religious leaders are these people who can speak truth to power and will be seen to be fairly objective, not quoting. So they should use that place very well. But also beyond speaking truth to power to the state, they also need to speak truth to power to society. And that means, one, religious leaders have to be very knowledgeable. You know, like for example, there's this common rhetoric we've heard even here about the education system being bad. By the way, it's not very bad. It's true there's the infrastructure gaps. But this question is being engaged with world over. And what is the real crisis? There are no jobs. The industry has died. There's nowhere to absorb where people are coming from. But being fairly educated is better than being illiterate. And that's why we need to train people to be adaptable. When they come to our churches, when they spend there the whole day without staying at home, does a religious leader get concerned to ask, where has this child been? When we grew up, you wouldn't be allowed to hang around a religious place. Like, you'd be asked, don't you have work to do at home? There was a gospel then of he who has not worked should not eat. That was the thing. So if you visited someone, work was very central to being a Christian. Are we preaching the same today? So I think the problem is not just the education system being this or the other. When religious leaders speak truth to power, other than just talking about vices like corruption, they should also be asking the state, what are we doing about industrial development? What are we doing about creating jobs? The church has to come up and speak around that. And beyond that, I think one thing we haven't paid much attention to today here is the whole process of nation building. Some of the challenges we are having is because we don't have a national ideology. So everyone is pushing or pulling in their tribe, everyone's pushing and pulling in their religion. That does not build a nation. Nation building is a process undertaken by the state. It is a daily issue. It is, I mean, that's why we go to church every Sunday. Even when we are sinning, we go there, and that helps us to remember that we are either Christian, or on Friday it helps one remember they are Muslims, and the Muslims even do it better. They pray 5 times a day. So that inculcates in you the culture of being. What is happening on the state front to inculcate us into being Ugandans? That is not there. So religious institutions are privileged. They have a platform. They can use that platform very well, and we look to you. Use the platform very well and deliver the rest of us. Thank you.
Apostle, I think for you and the Reverend, it will be a twofold question. Looking at media, the power of media right now, social media, how young people are tearing each other apart. You go on a feed and you're like wondering what is happening in this place. You have that space in there. What's the role of religious leaders and institutions in that area? But also, I know you have men gather. We have so many fatherless families. There's also a bill coming up for marriage, divorce, and separation, which has 1 to 7% of our country's divorces and separations. Comment on those two and how religious leaders and institutions should step in there.
Okay, 3 things. Number 1, and quickly, we need to live by example. Because it's one thing for me to, point a finger on who is behaving, out of order online, on social media and whatever they're doing with the tools they have been given. But it's another when, this same light has to come on my altar and I'm also found wanting. We religious leaders are using the same, I'll give you an example. A young child died once, a young lady died, and a religious leader went on social media and said that I had sacrificed the child, this young lady now whom we discovered, Mirembe, I think, whom they later discovered was killed by a jilted lover. But a religious leader once said that because she used to come to my church, that I took her in a ritual and sacrificed her. This is a religious leader doing that, see? So it has to, as painful as can be and shameful as can be, it has to begin with us to firstly set the example and live right before those whom we want to hold accountable by the very standards. But also number 2, I think we have forgotten fundamentally the power of intercession and prayer. We can mention all these practical steps, but I think there are things like I think Reverend Biarugaba said, that we can speak all we want, but the hearts of men are desperately wicked. And I think there's a place where we have to emphasize the place of actually intercession and prayer from all levels in society for our nation, because there are things I don't think are going to be changed by rhetoric, semantics, or vocabulary. They're going to go back into the conviction of people independently or individually to say, I think what I have done is wrong, but it's by a prayer of a certain mother somewhere in there. Many of our leaders, I think that's what Rev D was saying, we're talking, you know, we're speaking so much than we are listening. Maybe through the places of intercession and, you know, being in our secret place, we will really define the authority of the church. Because, you know, some things can only come from a pattern of answered prayer. There are things I don't see in this nation can change except we really pray. And I know many religious people or faith leaders who don't really pray for the nation. Like, you know, we say they pray for their own family, their own groups, their own, you know, people, but we don't really take time to intercede for our generation.
Thank you very much, Apostle. Reverend.
Taking the example of the nation of Israel, the shepherding role was invested in these three offices. The office of the king, the office of the prophet, and the office of the priest. Even kings have a shepherding role, matters of justice and equity, and that's beyond what we are talking about as religious leaders. So our leaders in the civic and political arena, they too have a shepherding role of society that they must, and they are responsible to God in that sense. Now, as a church leaders or as religious leaders, we have a role of raising them to appreciating that responsibility and hopefully then holding them accountable, whether they are doing it well or not. But the president, the executive government, has a shepherding role of Uganda, and by which they are responsible to God in ensuring justice, in ensuring equity, in ensuring fairness.
Thank you very much. Sheikh Juma, your parting shots. Your thoughts, especially on family and the bill that is pending, but also on fatherless homes and looking at media, how it's influencing young people today.
Yes, let me begin by this verse in the Quran, chapter 103. It's called Surah Asr, the chapter of the time, where Allah says that wal asri, by the time when the sun is setting, innal insana lafi khusri, indeed man is in a total loss. Illa ladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, except those who believe in God and then they do the righteous things. Watawasaw bil haqqi, they enjoin to their people what is right, what is the truth. Watawasaw bis sabr, and they enjoin to the people about what? About sabr means tolerance in the issues of the life. So why the time God is talking about there is not the 24-hour time, but the time that man is getting, when you are getting old to your grave and without doing anything good, then you are in a total loss. Now this loss can be the one we are talking about, when you are not giving to the society, or what you give is always detrimental to the society is the issue. Except those who believe. Now I want to talk about those who believe and do righteous. What is that righteous God is talking about? One, there are 5 major issues of righteous. One, God talks about if you can do good to yourself and your family, you provide for them. That's one of the things. Then the second thing is that you and your neighbor, you provide for your neighbor. And the neighbor here, of course, Jesus also talked about the neighborhood, that love your neighbors, love your neighbors, you love yourself. Now, Quran goes ahead to say who is a neighbor. Jaru dhil kurba, neighbor who is a relative, neighbor who is geographically around you. Wal jaril junub, a neighbor Like now, when you enter a bus, the one who sits beside you is your neighbor. You have to do good to this person, don't harm this person. Then this is the neighborhood. Then the third one is to your relatives, whoever is your relative. You know, you don't choose your relative. God chooses for you your tribe. You can't choose that one. You can choose religion, but not your tribe and clan. You'll always be there and die there. Be good to them. The fourth one is you have to be good to the people whom you share a religion with. Be good to them. Share with them whatever you have. The fifth one is be good to your country, because even your country, you don't choose your country. You are a Ugandan. It's our God who made you Ugandan. The others were Kenyan. The others who are Sudanese. Others are Congo. So you have also to be good to this. Now, if people take this serious and they work with this, then I think problems will be really reduced. The issue of the social media is one of those things I'm talking about, the speedy way of children learning.
Influencers.
Sometimes when I leave my phone, by the time I come back, I find my child already using the phone. And I don't shout on them, but I come nearer to see what programs are they interested in. You will see them in quite a different program. You go home, you find the TV, they have put on, you know, there are a lot of religious programs in the TV. Children don't go there. They know where they are going. So you find that there is a problem. So I think now we also need to infiltrate the media with the words of God. We have to infiltrate the media. And then we need also one-on-one talk to our people, those who matter. You know, there are people who matter in the society, but we don't meet them. For example, those in prison, maybe arrested because of corruption. Maybe how many times have we as religious leaders meet them? Because this is the time they will listen to us in the prisons. We've never gone there. Do you know why people like Mark Tyson became a Muslim? He converted to Islam because the Muslims entered the prison, met him and talked to him. That made him to change, because that is the time they needed us and we are not there for them. We want people to come to us, and we don't go to them. Going to people is called dawah. And people coming to you is education. With education, go to where you are supposed to go to the teacher. But with the dawah, it is us going to the people. I think that area we have not covered enough. That is my take on this.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Lastly, Rev D.
I want to say that the church is impacting the world. We forget how much we've been through as a nation, but also how many influences there are on the people who are our congregation. I call to the churches. We actually, when Apostle Vega talks about prayer, prayer is not just asking God for what we want. It's about listening. We as religious leaders, we need to listen more. We need to identify the challenges and also seek ways of addressing. We need to be available. But the biggest calling we have on our lives is to equip you, Timothy, when you come to lead a program like this. What are you portraying? Because the religious leaders are few, but we equip those who are in our congregations to go and use their expertise, their influence, their power to transform for the good of this nation. And I think, yes, we need to listen to one another so people are not focused on our divisions, but rather by the power of the word that we're bringing, that will bring the change we want to see.
Thank you very
God
much.
bless you.
Let me read some feedback here that's come through. Thank you for the program. It's uplifting and inspiring. Dr. Idris from the Islamic University there. Our government has failed us. Teaching truth belongs to the church, but the decision to do the right thing belongs to individuals. Okay, thank you for that. Humphrey sends in a lengthy message, but I'll read just a bit of it. Church, the face of Church faces global diversity. Some good work is being done, but maybe some of us are opening and others are closing doors. So let's leave the recipients not to be confused, but also decide on how the status quo will look like. Cephas Simon here continues and says, I'm still Simon here from Serere. I think it's difficult for religious leaders to preach a lot against corruption, but because the invisible hand is growing into the church. I know a group and has contributed money to the building of the church in Serere. You hear about Uganda being defunded by World Bank because of laws. I don't know what religious leaders think about this, okay? Finally, Reverend Canon Aaron Mwesije, a lengthy one, which will be the last one. Uganda is a group of tribes, religion, factions, forced to live together. Religion in Uganda is currently doing a good job of preaching the gospel to drive away evil, but at the same time, characterized by factions born out of selfish motives, sometimes confusing and dividing further the weak and vulnerable in decision making, hence the faith and human values coming at stake. Okay. Professor Sarah, thank you very much for coming. Apostle Grace, thank you very much for coming. Reverend Geoffrey, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Sheikh Juma, we appreciate you. And Reverend Diana, thank you so much for coming. We'll end today with this quote. Trust is earned in drops, but it's lost in buckets. God bless you. Good morning.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.